I thought 40 years of building a life together bought you a certain amount of respect. But when Anita looked at me over the Christmas turkey last night and sighed, "Benjamin, stop being so difficult. You're confusing everyone." I felt the structural integrity of my family snap like a tension cable. I thought being humiliated in front of our guests was the worst part. I was wrong. The worst part came 6 hours later at 12:01 a.m. when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. But before I tell you exactly what happened when I picked up that phone, please do me a quick favor. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And I want to know, where are you watching us from? Drop your city in the comments below. I read every single one. Up until that moment, I was just the senile old man in the corner, the retired engineer who, apparently, couldn't follow a simple conversation anymore. That was the narrative Anita had been carefully constructing for months. She had everyone at that dinner table, including our family friends, convinced that my memory was slipping, that my suspicions were just paranoia, and that her grocery runs and migraines were real. I sat there in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in the house I had paid for, wondering if maybe she was right. Maybe I was losing it. But when I picked up that phone at midnight and heard my son Theodore's voice shaking on the other end, the fog didn't just lift, it burned away. He wasn't calling to wish me a Merry Christmas. He was calling because he'd found the one thing Anita thought she had buried under a mountain of gaslighting: the truth. The carving knife felt heavy in my hand, unbalanced, much like the atmosphere in the dining room. I had sharpened it myself in the garage that morning, strictly adhering to the 20-degree angle I've used for decades. But as I stood over the golden brown turkey, my hand hesitated. That split second of pause was all Anita needed. She reached out, her fingers manicured in festive red, and gently but firmly took the handle from my grip, offering a pitying smile to the 12 guests watching us. "Maybe it's better if Uncle Mark does the carving this year, Benji," she said, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet tone she'd adopted recently, the one reserved for toddlers and the infirm. "We don't want an accident. You know how your hands get when you're flustered." My hands were steady as bedrock. They always had been. I looked around the table, searching for an ally, but gaze after gaze dropped to the tablecloth. "My hands are fine, Anita," I said, keeping my voice level, calculating the acoustics of the room to ensure I sounded calm. "I've carved the turkey for 30 years. "Oh, don't be difficult, darling," she sighed, rolling her eyes just enough for the table to see. "See? This is what I was telling you about, Mark. He gets so defensive over the smallest things lately. It's the memory lapses. They make him irritable." Across the table, Mark, my college roommate, the man who had been the best man at our wedding, didn't look me in the eye. He stood up, wiping his mouth with a napkin, and offered a tight, apologetic chuckle that sounded like dry leaves scraping together. "It's okay, Ben. Sit down, buddy. I got this. Let's not make a scene, right?" The betrayal wasn't in the words. It was in the laughter. A few guests chuckled nervously, relieved to break the tension, validating Anita's narrative that I was the problem, the volatile variable in the equation. I felt the heat rise up my neck, not from anger, but from a profound, disorienting shame. Was I forgetting things? Had I shaken the knife? In engineering, when the data doesn't match the observation, you check the instrument. But my instrument, my mind, felt compromised. I didn't argue. I couldn't. The logic of the situation had been rigged against me. I simply nodded, backed away from the table, and walked out of the dining room. Behind me, I heard the clinking of silverware resume, the conversation picking up pace to bury the awkwardness I had caused. I retreated to the guest room, my exile, my cell. I sat on the edge of the stiff, unused mattress and stared at the digital clock. 8:42 p.m. The silence in the room was heavy, contrasting sharply with the muffled laughter drifting down the hallway. I replayed the last few months in my head, analyzing every argument, every forgotten chore, looking for the structural failure in my own brain. I felt untethered, drifting in a sea of gaslight, terrified that the engineer was finally obsolete. The house had finally fallen silent around 11:30 p.m., the last of the guests ushering themselves out with sympathetic glances in my direction. I was still in the guest room, still fully dressed, when the door creaked open. Anita stood there, pressing her palm against her temple. Her eyes squeezed shut in a performance of agony I had seen a dozen times in the last year. "It's a migraine, Ben," she whispered, her voice tight. "The noise tonight? It was too much. I need to go to the 24-hour pharmacy on 4th Street. We're out of sumatriptan." I instinctively stood up, reaching for my keys on the dresser. "I'll go," I said. "You shouldn't be driving if your head hurts that bad." "No." The word came out sharp, too fast, before she softened it with a sigh. "No, you've had wine, and honestly, you're in no state to drive at night. Your night vision isn't what it used to be. Just stay here. I'll be back in an hour." Before I could protest, she was gone. I heard the garage door rumble open and shut, leaving me alone in the oppressive quiet of the house I had built. I tried to lie down, but my mind was a racing engine I couldn't switch off. I stared at the digital clock as the minutes ticked by. 11:58, 11:59, 12 hosti. At 12:01 a.m., my phone buzzed against the nightstand wood, the sound startlingly loud in the silence. It was Theodore. My stomach dropped. Calls at this hour are never good news. They are emergencies. I answered, expecting to hear that Anita had crashed the car. "Dad." His voice was a whisper, trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. "Dad, don't freak out. Just tell me exactly where Mom said she was going." "The pharmacy," I said, confused. "She has a migraine. Ted, is she okay?" There was a long, static-filled pause on the line, the kind of silence that precedes a controlled demolition. "She's not at the pharmacy, Dad. I'm at the grand opening party for my friend's bistro, the one near the marina. I stepped out to call an Uber, and I saw her car." He took a ragged breath. "She pulled into the guest parking lot at the Bayside condos. Dad, she used her key fob to get into the main gate." The Bayside condos, Mark's complex. "Are you sure?" I asked, but the question was mechanical. I already knew he was sure. "I watched her walk in, Dad. She didn't look sick. She was laughing on the phone." I hung up and sat in the dark, the phone growing warm in my hand. Suddenly, the chaotic data of the last year snapped into a horrifyingly perfect alignment. The sudden errands that took 3 hours, the constant criticisms of my memory to make me doubt my own timeline, the migraines that required solitude. It wasn't entropy, it was engineering. I wasn't losing my mind, I was being managed. The realization hit me colder than the winter draft from the window. My wife wasn't sick, and I wasn't senile. I was just the obstacle she needed to clear away. I didn't cry. Tears are a release valve for emotional pressure, and right now I needed the pressure. I needed it to drive the piston of my resolve. Most men, faced with the radioactive fallout of a 40-year betrayal, might have poured a scotch or collapsed into the paralysis of grief. But I am not most men. I am a civil engineer. When a bridge shows signs of catastrophic failure, you don't weep over the cracked concrete. You shut down traffic, get under the pylon, and find the fracture point. I walked out of the guest room and down the hall to my study, my footsteps silent on the hardwood. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. The glow of the monitor was enough. I sat in my leather chair, the one Anita had been nagging me to throw out, and cracked my knuckles. It was time for a root cause analysis. I started with the digital footprint. Anita handled the bills, claiming the online portals were too tech-heavy for me these days. Another subtle brick in the wall she'd built around my competence. I guessed the password on the second try. It was her birthday, followed by Mark. The arrogance of it, the sheer lack of operational security, almost made me laugh. I pulled up the call logs for the last 6 months and opened a fresh spreadsheet. I began to enter the data points, cross-referencing them against the nights I had supposedly lost my mind. The pattern emerged with terrifying mathematical precision. I looked at the entry for November 14th. That was the night she claimed I had forgotten to lock the back door, leaving us vulnerable to intruders. She had screamed at me for 20 minutes, calling me a danger to the household. I checked the log. 11:14 p.m., a 30-minute call to Mark. She hadn't been scared of burglars. She had been on the phone with him in the sunroom. She needed a reason to be awake, a reason to be agitated when I walked in, so she manufactured a security breach to cover her own flushed state. Then there was October 2nd, the lost anniversary dinner reservation. She told me I had booked the wrong night, that the hostess laughed at us. I remembered booking it for the 2nd. She insisted I said the 3rd. I looked at the text logs. September 30th. A text to Mark saying he's taking me to Le Pierre on Saturday. Can't talk. She knew the date. She had gaslit me into a public apology just to sabotage the night because she couldn't bear to play the loving wife for 3 courses. I moved to the credit card statements. The migraine expenses were there, listed under the pharmacy chain, but the timestamps didn't align with her stories. A purchase at 9 p.m. when she said she was in bed? A recurring charge for $140 at a drugstore that, upon a quick Google Maps cross-reference, shared a merchant ID with the high-end liquor store next to Mark's condo complex. My hands flew across the keyboard. I logged into the vehicle's connected app, the one she insisted we get for safety, and pulled the location history, documenting every discrepancy, every lie, every instance where my sanity was the collateral damage for her infidelity. It wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated campaign of psychological warfare. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had systematically dismantled my confidence to ensure I wouldn't have the strength to question her. She needed me weak so she could be reckless. By 3:30 a.m., I had a dossier. The senile old man had vanished, replaced by the man who had once calculated the load-bearing capacity of the I-95 overpass. I saved the file to an encrypted cloud drive and printed a hard copy, sliding it into a folder labeled Project Blue. I leaned back, the cold light of the screen reflecting in my glasses. I wasn't confused anymore. I was calibrated. The garage door rumbled beneath the floorboards at 4:30 a.m., a low vibration that I felt through the soles of my slippers. I was sitting in the dark living room, the dossier safely hidden away in the false bottom of my file cabinet, waiting. But as the door from the garage opened, I slumped my posture. I let my mouth hang slightly open, relaxed my facial muscles into a mask of weary confusion, and dimmed the sharp intelligence in my eyes. If she wanted a senile husband, I would give her the performance of a lifetime. Anita walked in, bringing with her a gust of cool morning air and the faint, unmistakable scent of expensive cologne. Mark's cologne, Santal 33. She looked disheveled, but in a staged way, like she had been battling the elements rather than a lover. She tossed her keys on the counter with a heavy, dramatic sigh. "Oh, Ben," she breathed, spotting me in the armchair. "You're still up? I told you not to wait." She rubbed her temples theatrically. The pharmacy was a nightmare. Their system was down. I had to wait 45 minutes just for them to find the prescription. My head is absolutely splitting. I blink slowly, looking at her with vague concern. "Did you get the white pills? Or the blue ones?" I asked, deliberately stumbling over the details. "The white ones, Ben, obviously." She walked past me, patting my shoulder with a condescending affection that made my skin crawl. "God, you look exhausted. You're probably confusing tonight with your blood pressure meds again. Just go to bed, okay? I can't deal with explaining this right now." Right, I muttered, shuffling to my feet and feigning a slight wobble. I worry, you know. It's late." "I know you do," she said, her back already turned as she poured a glass of water. "But you really need to rest your mind. You're getting everything mixed up." I went to bed and lay there, listening to her shower, away the evidence of her betrayal. I didn't sleep. I just calculated the structural load of the lies she was piling onto our marriage, waiting for the inevitable collapse. I waited through the weekend, playing the part perfectly. The next Monday morning, I told her I was going to the hardware store, a safe, puttering old man activity that she wouldn't question. Instead, I drove to a diner on the other side of town to meet Theodore. He was already there, sitting in a booth, his leg bouncing nervously. His eyes were red-rimmed. He clearly hadn't slept either. When I slid into the seat, he looked ready to explode. "Dad, why are we here?" he hissed, keeping his voice low but intense. "We should be at the house. We should be throwing her stuff on the lawn. I saw her car, Dad. I saw her walking in there with him. How can you just sit there and drink coffee?" "Lower your voice, Ted," I said, calmly stirring cream into my cup. "We aren't doing anything today because we aren't ready." "Ready? What is there to be ready for? She's cheating on you with Uncle Mark." He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "She's gaslighting you, making you think you're crazy. We have the proof." "We have an anecdote," I corrected him, my voice steel. "You saw a car. You saw a woman walking. In a court of law, that's circumstantial. In a divorce settlement involving the assets I've spent 40 years accumulating, that's nothing." I leaned in, locking eyes with my son. She thinks I'm feeble. She thinks I'm a confused old man who can't track a conversation. That is our greatest tactical advantage. If I confront her now, she'll spin it. She'll say she was dropping off paperwork for Mark. She'll say you were drunk at your party and saw wrong. She will lie, and she will be good at it. Theodore stared at me, the anger slowly giving way to realization. He saw it then, the shift. He wasn't looking at his difficult father. He was looking at the civil engineer who used to solve unsolvable drainage problems for the city. "So, what do?" he asked quietly. "We build the case," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "We don't just want to catch her. We want to dismantle her narrative so completely that when the dust settles, not even she can deny the wreckage. I need you to be normal." "Can you do that?" Theodore took a deep breath and nodded. Yeah, Dad, I can do that." "Good," I said. "Now drink your coffee. We have work to do." By Monday afternoon, the glass doors of the forensic accounting firm hissed shut behind me, sealing out the noise of the city. I adjusted my tie in the reflection, a Windsor knot tied perfectly from muscle memory, despite Anita's recent insistence that I could barely dress myself without supervision. I wasn't here to be supervised. I was here to conduct an audit. My lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Eleanor, who had handled my estate planning for years, was already waiting in the conference room. Beside her sat a younger man, introduced as a forensic analyst, whose laptop was open and connected to the main projector. The air in the room was sterile, smelling of coffee and dry erase markers, the scent of cold, hard facts. "We've done the preliminary dive based on the account numbers you provided, Benjamin," Eleanor said, skipping the pleasantries. She knew me well enough to know I didn't want sympathy. "It's substantial." "Show me," I said, taking a seat at the head of the table. The analyst tapped a key, and a spreadsheet illuminated the wall. It was a chaotic web of red figures, a visual representation of the market volatility Anita had been bemoaning for the last 2 years. Every time I had asked about the dipping balance in our retirement portfolio, she would sigh, pat my hand, and remind me of the risky trades I had supposedly insisted on making during my confused episodes. "You moved that money into tech startups, Ben, remember? You were so adamant." Now it's gone. I had believed her, internalized the guilt of losing our nest egg. "Here is the narrative you were told," the analyst said, using a laser pointer to circle a series of withdrawals labeled capital loss, venture speculation. "And here is the reality." He clicked to the next slide. The labels stripped away. The money hadn't been lost to a bad market. It hadn't vanished into failing tech startups. It had been wire transferred. $50,000 on June 12th, the analyst read. $25,000 in August, another $40,000 in November, all transferred to an LLC registered in Delaware. "Who owns the LLC?" I asked, though the phantom ache in my chest told me I already knew the answer. "MS Consulting Group," Eleanor said softly. "The registered agent is Mark Stevens." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I stared at the numbers, feeling the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just adultery. Adultery is a crime of passion, a weakness of the flesh. This was systematic, predatory extraction. Anita hadn't just been sleeping with my best friend. She had been paying him with my life savings. She had convinced me I was senile to cover up the fact that she was robbing me blind. Every time she comforted me after a bad trade, telling me it was okay and we'd make do with less, she was laughing at me. She was funding their future with the wreckage of mine. "The total?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. $240,000 over 18 months, the analyst replied. I took off my glasses and cleaned them slowly with my handkerchief. I needed a moment to recalibrate the parameters of the conflict. This was no longer a domestic dispute. It wasn't a heartbreak. It was a felony. "She's not just unfaithful, Eleanor," I said, putting my glasses back on and looking at the screen. I waited until Tuesday evening to set the charges. Anita was in the living room, scrolling through her iPad with a glass of Chardonnay, looking every inch the relaxed, victorious wife. She believed the storm had passed. She believed the confused old man had accepted his reality and gone back to his corner. I walked in slowly, holding a cup of herbal tea, the decaf blend she insisted I drink to calm my nerves, and sat on the ottoman opposite her. "Anita," I started, keeping my voice low and laced with hesitation. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about Christmas." She didn't even look up from the screen immediately. It was a power move, a subtle reminder that my thoughts were secondary to whatever social media feed she was consuming. "Oh, Ben, let's not rehash it. You were having a bad night. We've moved on." "No, I haven't," I said, looking down at my hands. "I was out of line. You were right. I was difficult. I made a scene in front of everyone, and I embarrassed you. I've been feeling terrible about it." That got her attention. She lowered the iPad, her expression softening into that familiar, patronizing mask of pity. This was the dynamic she craved. Me, broken and apologizing. Her, the benevolent caretaker. "Well, it's big of you to admit that, Benji. It really was quite stressful for everyone." "I want to make it up to you," I continued, pushing the performance further. "And to everyone else. I was thinking, maybe we could host a late New Year's dinner? Just a small one, next Saturday." She frowned slightly. "A dinner? Ben, do you really think you're up for that? The stress triggers your episodes." "I won't be cooking," I assured her quickly. "We'll cater it. I just want to host. I want to clear the air." I took a breath, preparing for the critical maneuver. "And I specifically want you to invite Mark." Anita froze. For a microsecond, the mask slipped, and I saw a flash of genuine alarm in her eyes. "Mark?" she repeated, her voice rising half an octave. "Yes, I was especially rude to him. I practically accused him of incompetence with the turkey," I said, shaking my head with feigned regret. "He's been such a good friend to us, helping you with all those errands. I want to apologize to him properly, face to face. I want to show him I'm still the same old Ben." I watched the gears turn in her mind. She scrutinized my face, looking for any sign of a trap, any hint of the forensic audit sitting in my safe, but she found only the tired, apologetic husband she had constructed in her own mind. The alarm in her eyes faded, replaced by a twisted sort of delight. The audacity of it appealed to her vanity, having her husband grovel to her lover in her own home. It was the ultimate power trip. "That's actually a really sweet idea, Ben," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "Mark would appreciate that. He's been so worried about you." "Good," I said, forcing a weak smile in return. "Call him. Tell him it's important to me." "I will," she promised, picking up her phone. "I'll text him right now." I stood up and walked back toward the hallway, leaving her to coordinate with her accomplice. She thought she was organizing a victory lap. She had no idea she was RSVPing to her own execution. The trap was set, the tension cables were pulled tight, and all that was left to do was wait for the guests to arrive. The catering staff had cleared the main course, and the room was filled with the low, comfortable hum of people who believed they were safe. Anita sat at the head of the table, radiating a toxic benevolence, while Mark sat to her right, swirling his Pinot Noir with the casual arrogance of a man who thinks he owns the place. I watched them from the sideboard, my pulse steady, my mind checking off the final items on the punch list. They were relaxed. They were sated. They were ready for my apology. I picked up a crystal flute and tapped it gently with a spoon. The chime cut through the conversation like a laser level. If I could have everyone's attention for a moment, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. The chatter died down. 12 pairs of eyes turned to me, some pitying, some curious. Anita smiled encouragingly, nodding at me to proceed with the script she thought we were following. Mark leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips, ready to accept my contrition. As many of you know, I began, moving toward the large 85-inch television mounted above the fireplace. I was difficult at Christmas. I made accusations. I forgot things. I was confused. I paused, letting the silence hang. Anita told me that my memory is failing, that I'm losing my grip on reality. And as an engineer, when a system fails, you don't guess at the problem. You look at the data. I pulled my phone from my pocket. So I decided to review the data. Anita's smile faltered slightly. Ben, what are you doing? Just make the toast. I prepared a small presentation, I said, my tone pleasant but unyielding, to help clarify where exactly my memory went wrong. I tapped the screen. The television flickered to life, mirroring my phone. The first slide appeared, a split-screen graphic titled Discrepancy Report, November 14th. On the left side was a text message from Anita. Going to the pharmacy, migraine is killing me. Timestamp 11:15 p.m. On the right side was the connected car GPS log from her vehicle, superimposed over a map. The red line didn't go to the pharmacy. It went straight to the Bayside condos, Mark's complex, and stayed there for 3 hours. The room went so quiet you could hear the refrigerator compressor humming in the kitchen. As you can see, I said, using a laser pointer I'd pulled from my pocket, the red dot steady on the map. My wife has a very specific navigational error when she has migraines. She seems to confuse the pharmacy with the guest parking lot of the Bayside condos. Ben, stop this, Anita hissed, standing up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. Turn it off. You're having an episode. Sit down, Anita, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the absolute immovable weight of a concrete foundation. I haven't gotten to the financials yet. I swiped left. The screen changed. Asset migration audit. It showed a series of bank transfers, $50,000, $25,000, $40,000, labeled venture speculation loss in our joint ledger. Beside them were the corresponding deposit receipts into an LLC account. MS Consulting Group, I read aloud. Registered agent, Mark Stevens. I looked directly at Mark. He had turned a pale, sickly shade of gray. The wine glass in his hand was trembling so hard, wine was sloshing onto his knuckles. It appears, Mark, that my bad investments were actually just direct deposits into your checking account. That's not senility. That's grand larceny. Ben, please, Mark stammered, looking for an exit that didn't exist. And finally, I said, swiping one last time, the visual confirmation. The screen filled with high-definition photos Theodore had taken the night of the pharmacy run. Anita's car entering the gate, Anita walking into the lobby, Mark opening the door for her in his bathrobe. I turned back to the room, to the shocked faces of our friends who had laughed at me just a week ago. I was told I was difficult, I said, closing the presentation app and slipping the phone back into my pocket. I was told I was imagining things. But as you can see, my memory is perfect. It was the loyalty of my wife and best friend that was defective. The silence that followed the slide presentation didn't last long. It was broken by the sound of a chair crashing backward as Mark scrambled to his feet, his face slick with a sudden cold sweat. He didn't look at me, and he certainly didn't look at Anita. He looked at the door. I think I should go, he stammered, his voice cracking. This is a family matter. I shouldn't be here. Sit down, Mark, Anita shrieked, her composure shattering like cheap glass. She turned on him, her eyes wide and manic. Don't you dare leave me here with him. Tell them he's making it up. Tell them the photos are fake. She spun toward the guests, her hands flailing as she tried to reconstruct the reality she had lost control of. You can't believe this. He used Photoshop. Theodore probably helped him. They're trying to ruin me because I wanted to put Ben in a home. He's sick. He's paranoid. It was a desperate, ugly performance, the flailing of a drowning swimmer trying to pull everyone else under. But the guests weren't laughing nervously this time. They were staring at the screen, then at Mark's terrified face, then at the undeniable time stamps. The math was simple, and everyone in the room could count. Mark ignored her. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair, mumbling something about calling his lawyer, and made a beeline for the hallway. He was halfway to the archway when a figure stepped out from the kitchen, blocking his path. Theodore stood there, arms crossed, looking wider and taller than I had ever seen him. He didn't look like a boy anymore. He looked like a wall. "You're not going anywhere, Mark," Theodore said, his voice deep and calm. "The process server is waiting in the driveway, and so are the police. We filed the fraud report this morning. Grand larceny is a felony, and we have the bank records to prove you knowingly accepted stolen funds." Mark stopped dead, shrinking back as if physically struck. Anita gasped, wheeling around to face me. "Police? You called the police on your own wife? Ben, look at me. I'm your wife. You can't do this." She rushed toward me, grabbing my arm, her nails digging into my jacket. "Benji, please, stop this insanity. You're having a breakdown. We can fix this. Just tell them it's a joke. Tell them." I looked down at her hands, the same hands that had taken the carving knife from me, the same hands that had transferred our life savings while I slept. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no love, no pity. Just the cold, clinical detachment of an engineer observing a structural failure. I gently, but firmly, peeled her fingers off my sleeve and took a step back. "You said I was difficult, Anita," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterics with surgical precision. "You told everyone at this table that I was impossible to live with, impossible to reason with, impossible to handle." I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the friends who had betrayed me with their silence. Then I looked back at her. "You were right," I said. "I am difficult. I am extremely difficult to fool twice." Anita opened her mouth to speak, to launch another lie, but the sound of sirens rising in the distance cut her off. The red and blue lights began to flash against the living room window, painting the disastrous dinner party in alternating shades of emergency. I walked past her, past Mark cowering near the coat rack, and stood next to my son. We didn't need to say a word. The bridge between us, once damaged by her lies, was solid again. I didn't need to pack. While the officers were taking statements and Anita was sobbing into a handkerchief that no one was offering her, I simply walked out the front door. My bags had been in the trunk of my sedan since 4 p.m. That was the thing about structural engineering. You always account for the exit strategy before you even break ground. Theodore walked me to the car. The flashing lights of the cruiser washed over the driveway, illuminating the manicured lawn I had mowed for 30 years. It looked like a crime scene now, which felt appropriate. "You sure you don't want to stay at my place, Dad?" Theodore asked, leaning against the driver's side door. "The couch is open. You shouldn't be alone tonight." "I need to be alone, Ted," I said, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "For the first time in a long time, I actually want to be alone." I looked back at the house. Anita was standing in the doorway, watching me leave. She looked small, framed by the grand entryway she had insisted we couldn't live without. She probably thought she had won a partial victory, that by leaving I was surrendering the castle. She didn't realize I was leaving her with the mortgage she couldn't pay and a foreclosure notice she wouldn't be able to stop. My credit was frozen. Hers was about to burn. Without my pension and the savings she had funneled to Mark, which the courts would freeze by morning, the house wasn't an asset. It was an anchor, and she was the one chained to it. "Take care of yourself, Dad," Theodore said. "I'll call you tomorrow." "Get some sleep, son," I replied. "The hard part is over." I drove 20 minutes across town to the modest 2-bedroom apartment I had leased 3 days prior under a separate account. It didn't have a grand dining room or a 3-car garage. It smelled faintly of fresh paint and possibility. I carried my single suitcase inside, locked the deadbolt, and listened. Silence. But it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the guest room, filled with unspoken accusations and gaslighting. It wasn't the nervous silence of a dinner party walking on eggshells. This was clean silence. Neutral. I walked to the small kitchenette and poured a glass of whiskey. A single malt I had bought for myself, not the cheap blend Anita bought for us. I sat in the single leather armchair by the window and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. I pulled my phone from my pocket. There were 0 notifications. I had blocked Anita's number before I even started the car engine. Whatever she was screaming at the walls right now, whatever new narrative she was trying to spin to the empty rooms, it literally could not reach me. I took a sip of the whiskey. It burned, warm and grounding. For months, I had been told I was broken, obsolete, a problem to be managed. I had been made to feel like a burden in my own life. I swirled the amber liquid in the glass, watching the light catch the rim. I wasn't confused, I wasn't senile, and I certainly wasn't difficult. I was free. Benjamin knew the difference between loyalty and manipulation, and he made sure that in the end, the truth was the only currency that mattered. So if you're watching this and you feel like something in your own relationship doesn't add up, trust that instinct. Your intuition isn't a symptom of being difficult. It's your first line of defense. Don't let anyone rewrite your reality to cover up their own lies. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. Share your own experiences in the comments. Have you ever had to trust your gut when everyone else told you you were wrong? I read every single one. And remember, the best revenge isn't just exposing the lie. It's walking away with your sanity intact and leaving the liars to pay the price. Until next time, this is Quiet Justice, reminding you that peace isn't something you ask for. Sometimes it's something you have to build for yourself.